the newsagents.
On today's episode, we'll be looking ahead to the next debate. No, you haven't tuned in on the wrong day. We're looking ahead to the first of the presidential debates, but also looking back on last night's prime ministerial one.
Yeah, and I guess the question we're asking is, can a TV debate make or break a president, make or break a prime minister, or does it just confirm what we already want to believe? Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And later, we'll be looking at the next TV debate. No, I know you know that all the election debates have happened here. But in America, the showdown between Donald Trump, Joe Biden, going mano a mano. Quite a vision, that, of a sort of wrestling scene by the fire.
Oh, yes. I mean, I'm imagining stallions. I'm imagining a saloon bar. I'm imagining the shootout. Not
an IV drip.
Just, yeah, exactly.
The Zimmer frames.
Two pairs of slippers.
The clattering of Zimmer frames. Yeah, it's going to be quite something. Huge amount at stake for Biden, because if he gets this wrong, it's hard to see how the campaign recovers. But we'll come to that in a bit.
But we should talk about our own final debate last night, shouldn't we? The last one. And it felt kind of, in a way, the kind of opposite. If we're saying that the American one actually is really sort of high stakes and high jeopardy, like there is so much sort of effort by broadcasters, people like us, to inflate our own debates in that way. And it was quite an interesting exchange in different ways. But fundamentally, it got to the end of it, and 50% of people thought Sunak won, 50% of people thought Starmer won. And there was no, once again, and I always think it's very hard to get to any kind of knockout moment, but once again it didn't feel,
there was
I missed something that there wasn't.
Absolute knockout moment, but it was on the other channel where Georgia was beating Portugal, and you could tell that everyone was actually thinking, when is this going to end? This is something historic, never before seen. Georgia runs into the Euros tournament, hits up Ronaldo's face, absolutely ashen. But that's the point, isn't it? That if you like, the energy has slightly left the TV debating stage. And it was not for want of trying, because Rishi Sunak was, dare I say, pumped up. I mean, I have never seen him quite so sort of energised or quite so full of combat. And Starmer wasn't really able to come back.
Yeah, there was a really good example of that, where, to be fair to him, I think, Sunak had a very, very good attack on Starmer on small boats, and it was good because not only was it very crisp, but it revealed a fundamental truth, which is, to be honest, the Starmer Labour offer on small boats and migration is extremely weak, because basically what they're saying is, we're going to crack down on the gangs. Well, guess what? Every single country in Europe has wanted to do that, and Sunak did sum that up very crisply.
So I'm wrong, he should say so. Because they're not being processed, they cannot be returned to where they came from. Can they, Prime Minister? If he wants to correct that, now's his chance to do it.
They cannot be returned. Well, do you know where these people come from?
No, he's not answering the question.
Do you know where they come from?
That.
Iran,
you can see.
Syria, Afghanistan. So when Keir Starmer says he's going to return people, is he going to sit down? Are you going to sit down with the Iranian ayatollahs? Are you going to try and do a deal with the Taliban? It's completely nonsensical what you are saying, right? You are taking people for fools, right? I think that these people should not stay in our country. They will be on planes to Rwanda. That's what I will do with them. You still can't answer the question.
To be fair, both offerings on small boats and immigration are pretty weak. What Keir Starmer offered in response was, I know how to clear up criminal gangs. I've been a director of prosecutions. I can do that. I've done it before. And he also hit back. I think his best moment was when he told the Conservatives, Rishi Sunak, not to be defeatist over questions of growth. And I think that, for him, was probably the strongest line, without ever saying he wanted to rejoin the EU or allow freedom of movement. He did say that he believed he wasn't going to accept the status quo.
What will it cost? You're not being straight with people. I know. What it will cost is more migration. He's not being straight with you. You think you just magic some good thing for us, and they won't want something in return, right? It's just, again, you're taking people for fools. They've been crystal clear. The price of any of those things is greater migration. It is fundamental to how they think about it.
If you were the Prime Minister, you would have to give something in return for the kind of deal you want with Europe.
Yes, but I think it's very important when you start those negotiations, you're very clear the lines you won't cross. And I've just set out the lines that I won't across. But I'm not a defeatist like the Prime Minister. And nor will I say to Julie, I won't insult Julie by saying it's all fine, everything's working, everything's great. Part of the problem we have with this Prime Minister is that his lived world is millions of miles away from the lived worlds of individuals across the country, the businesses and the families that they're trying to support. There's a massive gap. That is a problem.
I think what we can really see, now we've had these head-to-head debates, I think what we know is that Starmer is not brilliant at them, in a sense that I think he really does find how pugnacious they are, how direct they are, quite difficult in a way that Sunak doesn't. Sunak is much more prepared to go hard and to be aggressive and to pick him up and to dominate the space in a way Starmer doesn't. And I was talking to someone about this who knows Starmer well and saying, is this not a bit weird in one sense, which is that Starmer was a KC, right? He was someone used to dealing with the sort of cut and thrust of kind of legal debate and barristers, right? Anyone who's been in a court can see the top lawyers. They really have to think on their feet and be dexterous and be nimble. But they said to me, and I think it's a fair point, is that, yeah, but courts operate in such a different way. I mean, courts, the thing that Starmer was used to is that anyone who's been in a court knows this. Actually, they're highly respectful. They're constantly, they say, well, my learned friend thinks this. They're to the point of almost over politeness, and they give each other sort of time, and it is highly structured,
as well,
highly regimented. And a debate like that isn't. And you can sort of see that he can't quite make the transition. Well, I don't think it matters I don't think it matters especially, but it is not his arena, weirdly enough.
Well, on that specifically, a very good friend of mine, senior solicitor, litigation, and knows Keir Starmer very well, and said, oh, no, I used to instruct him the whole time to act as a barrister for us. And I said, oh, God, really, what was he like? Yeah, no, he was great. I mean, we used him for all our non-jury advocacy work. And I said, sorry, what does that mean? And what does he mean, non-jury advocacy? Oh, well, we would put him up before a judge to argue a technicality on the law.
Judge's KC, as they call them, yeah.
We didn't put him up before a jury because we didn't think he was that convincing with the public. And you think, that's a bit of a problem when you're running to be Prime Minister. I wondered whether Keir Starmer actually was like the kid who wants to go out and play football, and his mum has said to him, you mustn't get muddy. Please don't get your clothes muddy because we're going out for lunch with the family afterwards. So don't get muddy. And I think that there was an air of reticence of Starmer last night to get involved.
Play nice because you don't need to. Don't lose people.
Don't get into a fight you don't need to get into.
But I have to say, I think the real low moment, actually, of the whole debate came not from either candidate, but from the audience. There was this awful moment where somebody just sort of basically sounded like a sulky teenager and came forward with this,
you're
bullshit, you're really the best, you're bullshit. And it was a bit like kind of Ollie from The Thick of It. Somebody who just sounded a little bit sort of like they were trying to get the attention. And honestly, it's a bit like saying, I've waited 40 minutes for a bus and then having a go at the bus driver.
Look, let's listen to it.
Mr. Sunak, I think you made a fair job of being Chancellor, but you're a pretty mediocre Prime Minister. Sir Keir, I think that your strings are being pulled by very senior members of the Labour Party. Are you two really the best we've got to be the next Prime Minister of our great country?
Sorry, I think it's just peacocking. And it hit a nerve because I find it really lazy. It's a lazy form of attack, which I feel like we're hearing more and more of, which is like, aren't all politicians why are you all so are you the best we can get?
Well, I was very surprised that the BBC chose to air that particular question.
That's my point. I don't blame him for being boorish in a way.
No.
There's a bit of production. Where on earth did it get us? What on earth were they supposed to say?
Yeah,
you're right, we are a bit
really rubbish.
It's just rude. Sorry, I just think it's rude.
It's completely.
Whatever you think of Starmer and Sunak, they're not Boris Johnson and Corbyn, right? Maybe they don't inflame the same passions, but they're also not kind of messing around with the law or with Parliament or with the truth in the way that we've seen, certainly.
We're going to go on to discuss the debate in the US between a 78 and an 81-year-old, both of whom have their very senior moments, and you think they are going to be the leader of the most powerful nation in the world come January. I just think that, maybe we should feel we're blessed that you've got a choice between two intelligent people, Sunak versus Starmer. I just thought the question was also, I think that surely our job is to try and engage an audience in politics.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Not be saying, God, aren't they crap?
This
Yeah,
is what I think. I mean, fundamentally, I think that the problem with that question, when I watched it, I was amazed really that this was one of the questions that had been selected. Partly because, look, we've been saying for weeks and weeks when we're going around the country, it is absolutely true to say that there is a caustic cynicism out there about politics, right? Sometimes for very good reason. I am not sure, though, in terms of the BBC allowing a question to be asked that is looking at that through the prism of, like, the personal attributes of these guys. Whether, frankly, in terms of broadcasting about politics, we ought to be not only amplifying that, but lauding it. Like, there was loads of kind of commentary in the kind of post-debate spin room about, this was the question of the night, let's laud this guy. Wasn't he brilliant? And likewise, from a lot of political journalists afterwards, sort of lauding the question. I'm just not sure that we should be lauding or amplifying.
That's
kind
a
of
debate
what
you
is
can have in the pub. Have that debate in the pub with your friends. Exactly right. I don't think you can put it to the two candidates who are actually on stage, not least because one basically involved a pseudo-conspiracy about who was pulling Keir Starmer's strings,
that was also a little bit
which was
uncomfortable.
never actually uncovered, right?
I was also surprised that actually, just in terms of the debate, 75 minutes, there wasn't a single question on the NHS, schools, the environment, or foreign affairs, right? But there was a question about why you two so and I'm not entirely sure that is just as a bit
Maybe
of production.
we've got one in the Q&A later.
Maybe. Why are you three so
Tomorrow's Q&A. Why are you three? Why
Great
are all of you so
Okay, on the subject of which
Okay.
what I saw last night when I was scrolling on social media to see comments about the debate was apparently a fact check site which kind of seemed to be marking the homework, particularly of what Labour was saying. And then you look at this fact check site and you realise it's not what it seems. It's from Conservative Party HQ.
Look, we've got form with this because 5 years ago, in that December election of 2019, CCHQ put forward their own sort of revised, renamed Twitter feed called Fact Check UK, right? Which a lot of people went to believing that it would help them understand all the tiny specific details of policy. And of course, as soon as you look closely, you found it was actually the propaganda of the Conservative press office disguised as an independent body. And I called James Cleverly, who was then the Conservative Party chairman, out on this on Newsnight. And I asked him why he felt he had to do that. Why does the party have to do that?
Your own Conservative press office, just let me finish my question, was pretending to be a fact-check service. Let's just have a look at the Twitter feed for that debate that you put out. This is the Conservative press office pretending to be a fact-check service, and you've renamed yourself with a credibility tick, Fact Check UK. You were misleading the public. You were trying to coat your propaganda as hardened fact.
The Twitter handle of the CCHQ press office remained CCHQ Press, so it's clear the nature of the site. And the reason we did that is because we were calling out the inaccuracies, the lies that were coming out during the debate. The NHS is not for sale. It has never been for sale.
Misleading the public.
I mean, the thing is that I think we thought 2019 was a unique election, right? It had come in the middle of all the Brexit frustration and anger. It was kind of Dominic Cummings at the helm with Boris Johnson. We kind of thought the tricks of that election would be gone when Boris Johnson went. And yet, actually, what we learned last night is they haven't,
Except, the thing is, I was surprised to see it. I actually thought what kind of summed up this Conservative campaign was the fact that they did the same trick, but they did it a bit worse. Like, Fact Check UK is like a recognisable thing. Like, people might see that and go, oh, that's a fact check, right? What's Tax Check UK? It doesn't mean anything. It's like, and this sort of sums up the kind of just sort of how relatively kind of poor this campaign has been by comparison to the execution of the 19 one, whatever its wider demerits, which is that, frankly, they've been trying to sort of pull off the same old tricks, but just doing it in a way that didn't work quite as well. And, I got into sort of various arguments last night with people saying, oh, everybody on Twitter knows that this is absolutely fine and whatever. I think that, whether people on Twitter recognise this and remember this from 2019 or not, I don't know. I just kind of think it is incumbent upon our big parties when there is a wave and sea of online misinformation, which is getting worse and has got worse in the Elon Musk era, to behave with the highest degree of probity. So yeah, they did it in a cack-handed way. It was not particularly effective, but that's not the point. They shouldn't cross that line.
I mean, to be fair, and they have crossed this line, but the Labour Party is doing slightly similar things in some of the emails that they are sending out, saying things like mortgage bombshell under the Tories. Now, when you read that closely, it's not that the Conservatives under Rishi Sunak are actually going to do anything that they haven't told you about. It's just that they make the argument, following the Liz Truss mini budget, a lot of people's mortgages are going to run out in the next year, and then they're going to find that they go up. We know that. That's coming down the tunnel at us. But I think to call it a bombshell suggests that it is something that no one knows about, that is being hidden. I don't think Labour has to do that either, frankly.
Oh, the bombshell stuff, I think that's on the right side. You know, Labour's tax bombshell from the 92 campaign, I think that is part of the history of political campaigning. I think masquerading as something you're not, in an era when political literacy is kind of, you know, you worry about people's susceptibility to being given stuff that is not true, that is misinformation. We saw it in 2016 in Brexit. We saw it 2016 in the Trump campaign. To actively be changing your kind of logo to something that it's not, I just think
social media is extraordinary now, because we read more. We read so much more and we understand so much less, right?
Yeah, and it shows, again, the complete asymmetry of regulation that exists, right? So, you know, we all know just how tightly regulated broadcast television is in terms of anything you do in an election campaign. And, you know, I mean, you know, you have party political broadcasts, you know, on a very short length of time. It's all properly sort of spread around the different parties and so on. And then yet, online, it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly within the law, perfectly within the regulatory framework that we have insofar as it exists, for a party to just masquerade as being something that it's not. I mean, the one thing I'd say, though, is that I've kind of been surprised in this campaign, and I think it sort of reflects just how the sort of wider kind of torpor of the campaign, that actually the digital offerings from both sides have not been particularly interesting or innovative, and that's, I think, for slightly different reasons. One, the Tories have got no money, and their digital campaign is a shell of itself by comparison to what
was just a
2019.
Tweet saying tax. How many times do we?
Yeah, exactly. Like 1,000 times? I mean, is that all you got, lads? I mean, just gonna. I mean, seriously. And then the Labour one. I mean, you just sort of get the feel like with so much of the rest of the campaign.
Actually, their Instagrams were really good. The early videos were brilliant.
Yeah, some of them were, but it almost feels, again, the kind of sort of energyless at times, or the airlessness of the campaign. Partly because Labour's so far ahead, it just sort of sometimes feels they're not taking the risks that they might have done if it were tighter. And you get that, we talked about it the other week, you know, it's when you're not getting the kind of dirtiness of the campaign that we might have expected.
Bring on next Thursday, please.
Well, but that's the other thing, right, in terms of these debates. Now we've come to the end of them. I mean, I'm amazed. I don't know what two of you thought. I think if we'd been sat here 4 weeks ago, I think most people expected there to be at least some tightening of the polls, at least to some extent, even if it was, you know, between 3 and 4 points. The fact that has not happened, and if anything, it's gone in the other direction, I think is remarkable. And with 7 days to go, just 7 days to go, I just think I cannot see what, at this point now, could possibly happen to turn that around.
There are many superlatives that we can use about the debate that will take place at about 2 a.m. UK time, 9 p.m. Georgia time, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It will be the earliest we've ever seen an election campaign. It will be the oldest candidates. It will be 2 incumbents or former presidents. We've never seen that before.
I would say that I don't think there's been a debate with so much at stake so early. Now, the argument goes, hold it in June before the conventions, and if any ghastly cock-up happens on either side, you've got time to rebuild and, you know, the damage is limited. I would say that if Biden tonight doesn't deliver, then there are really serious questions over his candidacy. Because look at Joe Biden today and look at Joe Biden 4 years ago from the debates then. He looks a very different figure. He looks different. He sounds different. Of course, age, you know, we all age. But Joe Biden seems to have really accelerated in that aging process. And he's a shadow of his former self. And there are serious questions about whether he can be the candidate in November, and even bigger questions about whether he can remain the President of the United States until 2028.
And all that, I mean, we're talking about being on stage with a convicted felon with 34 convictions behind him. Let's not forget to mention that. There is something you need to understand about the staging of this debate as well, which is that there will be no audience, there's no live audience, and the mics will be cut between each of the questions when they've had their amount of time. What you won't see necessarily is Joe Biden trying to answer a question and possibly Donald Trump carrying on speaking throughout that. That will not be picked up by the mics, or the audience won't be there to see it, but it is possible that they will be doing that, or there will be on stage sound whilst the other is trying to speak, and you just don't know what that is going to do to the words coming out of the candidate's mouth.
And the other thing about the staging of this debate, and we started the podcast today talking about Rishi versus Keir Starmer and the kind of last night's debate. If you saw on last night's debate, they had facts and figures in front of them, they had talking points, they had things that they were going to say in conclusion.
Notes.
They had notes. They are going to go on stage with a blank notepad and a pen. They're not allowed to take anything in with them. There are no facts and figures allowed, nothing like that. So they have to just do it from memory on the hoof for 90 minutes. And, you know, it's a tall order for two guys who are old and showing every bit that they are aging.
Yeah. So there have been a lot of people offering advice, how you do this, what their candidates should be saying. You know, memo to Joe Biden, don't just talk about your record in office, try and look forward and try and hit Trump where it hurts. But now you're going to hear from one of the Trump campaign team, Caroline Sunshine.
In the Sunshine State.
In the Sunshine State of Florida, who is going to set out to us what she thinks their candidate needs to do to win.
Caroline, thanks very much for being with us. What are the tactics?
I never get ahead of the president because he just speaks from his mind. He'll decide what he wants to do. And he is our campaign's greatest political asset. But I think what our voters and what many people actually find so refreshing about President Trump is just what you see is what you get. That's exactly what he does. He's testing those ideas in real time. And he's just going to be himself on the debate stage.
Look, Caroline, we know that President Biden has been at his beach place in Rehoboth. He's been at Camp David. You know, the focus has been entirely on preparing for the debate. With Donald Trump, we've seen him out playing golf and probably not preparing anything like as much. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I disagree. President Trump's preparation has involved keeping an extremely busy schedule, doing exactly what he likes to be doing, which is being out with the American people. I mean, just in the last week alone, President Trump has been in 3 different battleground states in the United States. He's been on the phone with Rachel Morin, who was a young mother of 5 who was killed by an illegal immigrant, allegedly, who shouldn't have been in the United States in the first place under Joe Biden. I'm not even sure if Joe Biden knows that woman's name, let alone has taken the time to call her family. So President Trump likes to be out with the American people. That's exactly where he's been, whether it's in the deep blue Bronx or Detroit or Philadelphia. And it's not just that President Trump is out giving his message of hope to the American voters. Where I say that's excellent preparation for a debate is he's out listening to the American people. When President Trump was in Philadelphia after his rally, he went and visited a Philly cheesesteak shop. He met with the average
that won't do his heart any good.
out on a Saturday. Oh, well, President Trump's a young, vibrant man.
So, Caroline, you said allegedly, which I think is important when we're telling these stories of who we think candidates are meeting on the campaign trail. But let me ask you, is he nervous? Is the team nervous about what he might do on stage? Because we have seen him kind of descend into these, I'm going to say, shark-infested rants quite often, quite recently. There's one about washing machines, there was one about water, there was one about batteries, there was one about sharks. We don't know whether it's, you know, the teleprompter's gone down and he's suddenly kind of freewheeling and a bit scared. But I guess you're all holding your breath, aren't you?
No, that's what the American people love about him. They love that he's real. They love that he speaks about things that they understand. They love that he speaks to them the way I think a family member would speak or somebody that they're familiar with would speak. I mean, he really is a man of the people. And the rants that he goes on are actually about things that people care about or know about. and he's quite knowledgeable on granular topics. We're not nervous. It's Joe Biden who needs to be nervous. I've never seen Joe Biden string together an eloquent sentence about anything the American people care about. He's cloistered away in Camp David this week, surrounded by advisors who I'm sure are plotting his every move and charting it out. I'm not sure any of those people around him could tell you what the cost of milk is in the United States, or that a bag of chips at the grocery store costs $6.19, or that when Americans are going to fill up their gas tanks, it's costing them almost $5. I mean, President Trump is very in touch with where the American people are at. He's very grounded in that reality. Joe Biden and his entire campaign are surrounded by people who don't live in reality. So no, far from nervous. That's one of President Trump's greatest strengths.
Okay, you've just said to us that Biden can't string a coherent sentence together. What are you doing in terms of expectation management? Because if you set the bar so low and you just say, oh, he's a senile old fool, he should be kind of locked up in a nursing home now, then frankly, if he goes over that, he's done a lot better than people will have anticipated. I heard Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, saying, actually, you know what? He's a credible, sensible guy, la, 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 la. I just don't know what the messaging is from the Trump campaign on what to expect from Joe Biden.
Well, I think what I was pointing out is that, the White House, the Biden White House the other week was saying that some of these videos of Joe Biden that are raw, unedited footage that have been going viral on social media were somehow cheap fakes, that these were somehow altered. Joe Biden has a history of stumbling and bumbling. He was just over in your continent and doing the same thing. I mean, the American people see this with their eyeballs and ears, so they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But to your point about the bar, where the bar is not for, we've heard, our campaign has heard reports that Joe Biden is practicing standing, that's part of his preparation. He's practicing standing for 90 minutes, the art of standing. I don't know what that means. I don't know. I've never had to practice standing. President Trump doesn't have to practice standing for 90 minutes. He does that multiple times a week in front of crowds of thousands of Americans. But to your point, that's not where the real bar actually is. The bar for Joe Biden, to be very clear, isn't just to show up to this debate stage and manage to stand on his 2 feet for 90 minutes. No. He's going to have to stand by his record. He has a record of the last 4 years of being in office that he's going to have to stand by. And let's be very clear about what that record is. Joe Biden's going to have to stand by his record of giving free flights and free hotel rooms to illegal immigrants instead of helping Americans afford their rent and their mortgage payments. We saw a CBS poll come out just last week showing that 62% of Americans don't want mass amnesties for illegal immigrants. Yeah. They want mass deportations. Joe Biden is on the wrong side of that issue of where the American people are at, and he has a record to back that up. Same thing, fentanyl is the leading cause of death in the United States for Americans ages 18 to 45. Well, Joe Biden has allowed 30 tons of that substance to come across the southern border. 30 tons of fentanyl is enough fentanyl to kill every American citizen multiple times over. That is Joe Biden's record. That is the record he is going to.
I guess that they're both. Yeah, I guess they're both going to be defending their record, and I guess they're both going to be trying to explain policy. But fundamentally, we're treating them like, they're just both, two old men on stage together. But one is a convicted criminal who has got 34 convictions against him in the last month and who has tried to overturn democracy. I mean, I guess there is an asymmetry to what's going on here, isn't there? That they're not just two candidates. There's something quite abnormal about having a convicted felon on stage with you.
Oh, no, I worry you've been watching too much CNN. President Trump, the trial that President Trump...
Is it not true that he is a convicted felon?
Hold on. President Trump endured a sham trial. Let's be very clear. This is also part of Joe Biden's record. Our countries have a very special bond, right? A special relationship. Our country declared independence back in 1776 from a king that we felt was tyrannical. I would argue that Joe Biden is as much of a tyrant as King George. This
really?
Is a guy.
You don't think he's an elected president?
This is a guy who has weaponized the government against his political opponent, to be very clear. This is a guy that puts citizens of other nations ahead of citizens of his own. This is a guy who has profited off the backs, his family has directly profited off the backs of U.S. taxpayers by selling access to our government to personally enrich himself. That is the behavior of a tyrant. I would argue that any day of the week, twice on Sunday.
So the Trump conviction was a sham, weaponized. What
Absolutely.
Do you think? Yeah. What about the Hunter Biden conviction? That one okay?
The big guy, the real family who should be on trial is the big guy himself. Joe Biden has lied to the American people not just once, but 16 times about his family's business dealings.
You think Joe Biden should be in prison?
I think Joe Biden should be held accountable for profiting off the backs of U.S. taxpayers for decades. Yes, him and his family. That's not how we do things in the United States. Nobody is above the rule of law.
And if a court of law found Joe Biden accountable, that would be okay. That would be legit, but not if they find Trump.
Do you think it's acceptable behavior? Do you think it's legal behavior for a sitting vice president to use his access, to use his position? I used to work in the White House, to be very clear. I worked in President Trump's White House. We had to sign ethics agreements saying we wouldn't so much as use a tissue if it meant that it was going to have some conflict of interest that could jeopardize the interests of the American people. I took an oath to serve my country, as did President Trump. I took that oath extremely seriously.
I think you might have been the only one.
It's insulting to me. I think that's classless. I don't think that's true. I think you look, like I said, I just look at a family profiting off the backs of U.S. taxpayers with millions of dollars.
So are you talking about Jared? You're talking about Jared and Ivanka?
I'm talking about Joe Biden. I'm talking about $1
yeah.
million from China. I'm talking about $6 million from Ukraine. I'm talking about $140,000 from Kazakhstan for a sports car. I mean, who wants to explain that?
It is fantastic to talk to you. Caroline Sunshine, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And have fun tomorrow night.
Thank you so much.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye.
Look, that was the spin room, pre-spun, pre-debate. You kind of know what you're going to get. As soon as Caroline Sunshine started talking to us, we knew it was going to be talking point. She wasn't actually going to let us particularly understand the fears and the terror that is probably going on amongst those close to Trump now. One thing I did learn is that, when you ask who's running the campaign, the word I got back was no one. There is no campaign. It is a state-by-state level, and there is no actual strategic campaign being run. There are no briefing rooms. It's quite interesting when she said he's going to be, Biden's going to be holed up with his team, trying to get word perfect. Trump isn't. He's just going to be out meeting people. I do think that's true.
Yeah,
there's no way of reining Trump.
I remember the Chris Christie story from the 2016 election campaign, where they were doing debate prep, and Chris Christie and a team of people, researchers, had prepared this file for a big meeting that they were going to have with Donald Trump about what to do, and these are the facts and figures on this issue. This is what you should say about the border. This is what we're going to say about the Affordable Care Act. This is what we're going to say about the treatment of our veterans, all the rest of it. And Chris Christie said that this big file, all it was a coaster for his orange juice, because he put his orange juice on top of it and never opened the file once. And Donald Trump will not. He will know that he wants to hammer Biden on the border, yes, on the state of the economy, yes, and try and rile him with stuff about Hunter Biden as well. Yeah. And, will it be dirty? You bet it will. And so for all the fact that people are planning and strategizing the way the debate should go, you have got two men who are thin-skinned, who will get under each other's skin and go for each other.
And we will give you all our post-debate analysis on that US presidential fight on tomorrow's News Agents USA special edition.
We're going to stay up all night to bring that to you. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The News Agents. This is a Global Player original podcast.